Hey there, 8th graders. Welcome to today's Explainer. We are about to tackle a massive, honestly kind of mind-bending puzzle from early U.S. history. We're going to look at how the institution of slavery, well, it didn't just impact one specific area or one group of people. No, it literally shaped the entire country, the economy, everyday society, and the massive political battles going on in Washington. It was this deeply rooted system that drove a massive wedge right down the middle of the American landscape. So let's unravel how that actually happened. Okay, let's dive into our roadmap for today. First up, a nation deeply divided. Second, the Southern agricultural economy. Third, the North's hidden connections. Fourth, the Western political battleground. And finally, biblical morality and education. We've got a lot of really important ground to cover, so let's just jump right in. Right off the bat, before we even touch on the economics or the politics of the time, we need to set our moral compass. Listen to this scripture from Isaiah chapter 1, verse 17. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed. Keep that powerful directive in the back of your mind as we go through this explainer. You see, history, it's not just a collection of dates, money, or land deals. It's fundamentally about human rights. It's about morality. It asks the really big question, what does a nation actually stand for? And how do its people treat one another? Section 1. A nation deeply divided. So, in the early 1800s, the United States was fundamentally split. Slavery wasn't practiced the exact same way everywhere, but its presence absolutely dictated the nation's path. To really understand how a brand new country could become so completely divided against itself, you just need to know one word: sectionalism. This is when different regions of a nation develop completely distinct economies, societies, and political goals, which leads to some incredibly deep divisions. Think about what that actually means. Because slavery was everywhere in the South, but mostly absent in the North, these two areas just started growing apart in almost every way imaginable. They developed different ways of living, different values. They were technically sharing one country, but they were experiencing two totally different realities. Moving on to Section 2, the Southern agricultural economy. Let's zoom in on the South for a second to see what was driving their entire region. I want you to really think about this. Why was slavery considered absolutely essential to the South's economy? Like, what was happening down there in the 1800s that made landowners feel they literally had to rely on forced human labor? Well, here's the answer. The Southern economy was entirely built on large-scale cash crops. We're talking massive, massive amounts of cotton, tobacco, and rice. And to grow these incredibly demanding crops on that scale for global export, plantation owners completely relied on enslaved labor. Without it, that staggering profitability just wouldn't exist for them. And it is so crucial to understand that slavery wasn't just, a job market for them. It was the absolute foundation of their society. It determined who had the wealth, who held the political power, and exactly who was at the very top and the very bottom of the social ladder. Section 3. The North's hidden connections. Now, what's really interesting is when we contrast the two regions. We have the Southern economy we just talked about, defined by plantation agriculture, enslaved labor, and cash crops. But the Northern economy was a completely different story. It leaned way more into manufacturing, smaller family farms, and free labor. Actually, by the early 1800s, most Northern states had legally abolished slavery altogether. Hearing that, you'd logically think, okay, they're living in two completely separate worlds, totally disconnected, right? But wait, did the North still benefit from slavery even after they abolished it? Think about it. If they didn't have enslaved labor on their own farms or in their own local factories, were they really disconnected from the Southern plantation system? The answer is absolutely yes. It creates what we call an economic web. Even though the North had completely different laws and values, Northern businesses were still indirectly cashing in on slavery. How? Well, Northern textile mills desperately needed that incredibly cheap Southern cotton to make their fabrics. Plus, Northern shipping companies were making an absolute fortune transporting those Southern goods across the ocean to Europe. So there was this invisible, highly profitable thread tying the whole country together through trade and money despite their massive moral differences. Which brings us to Section 4, the Western political battleground. Let's take this out west. As the U.S. rapidly expanded its borders, these new, mostly empty territories became a high-stakes battleground. But why? Why did the slavery debates focus so intensely on the West? Why were politicians back east getting into fierce, sometimes even physical fights over huge stretches of land where hardly anyone even lived yet? It essentially comes down to a giant political math problem. Let's walk through the logic. Step 1, The U.S. adds new territory. Step 2, that territory eventually grows and seeks statehood. And this is the big defining question. Will it be a free state or a slave state? Step 3, once it's a state, it gets to send new representatives and senators to Congress, which leads to step 4, the balance of power shifts. You see, every single new state meant crucial new political power for either the pro-slavery side or the anti-slavery side. It was a desperate race for total control of the national government. And this constant, bitter struggle over representation just completely destroyed any trust between the North and the South. The stakes were so incredibly high, literally controlling the laws of the entire nation, that compromise became basically impossible. Every debate was a zero-sum game. This political tug-of-war pushed the nation tragically and inevitably toward a massive conflict. Finally, Section 5, Biblical Morality and Education. Let's bring this out of the history books and apply it directly to your lives right now. Check out this scripture from Romans 8:6-7. It says, "For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace." When people, or even whole nations, just focus on worldly, carnal gains, like the unchecked wealth from a horrific system like slavery, it always leads to destruction. We literally just saw that exact destruction unfold in the divided U.S. But keeping your mind spiritually focused, that brings true life and actual peace. And that gets right to the core philosophy of the HeroesMart Academy Godly Learners series. Education without morality will hurt. Seriously, what is the point of being super smart? What's the point of deeply understanding economics or political strategy if you're using it to make choices that intentionally hurt other people? The smartest men in the country built that early American economy, but because they lacked the spiritual morality to recognize basic human rights, they engineered a system that caused immense suffering and eventually tore the whole nation apart. So, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder today. Based on everything we just covered, predict what might happen if one side, either pro-slavery or anti-slavery, gained a permanent majority in Congress. Think carefully about those invisible economic webs, those deeply held sectional beliefs, and the stark moral realities. What do you think would inevitably happen next? Jot those thoughts down for homework, and we will pick up this important conversation next time. Until then, keep learning, keep seeking justice, and keep your mind spiritual.